So we're going to go over the short-run aggregate supply curve. This comes from our boy John Maynard Keynes. He's in the unofficial Macro Hall of Fame or Economist Hall of Fame. To recount, the short-run aggregate supply, also known as the Keynes supply curve, coming from Keynesian economics, and the sticky wage, sticky price. So John Maynard Keynes is not disputing Jean-Baptiste Say's in The Classical Economist. He acknowledges that in the long run, the supply curve is vertical, but he's saying that demand is the key, not supply. And in the short run, recessions, inflationary gaps happen, and this can happen due to underconsumption and overconsumption due to sticky price, sticky wage. Not all resources are always used during a recession. And wages and prices are sticky in the short run due to contracts, due to salaries, due to menu prices. And an increase in price level will change the quantity supplied in an economy in the short run. So it will result in an increase in the amount of output of an economy or vice versa. This is the short run aggregate supply curve. In the short run, if price levels rise, and they will rise due to aggregate demand increasing, aggregate supply would increase, or quantity supply, output would increase. If price levels fall, this would be due to a decrease in demand, like a recession, then output would decrease. Quantity supplied of the aggregate would decrease. There are three reasons this happens. We know recessions happen. We know this stuff happens. So these are three ideas to help explain that. The first is the sticky wage theory. It's the idea that certain contracts are fixed in the short run. People are on salaries. And this doesn't even have to be employee contracts. These could be contracts for certain services where companies agree to buy this much of this good over the next 12 months. Or it could be contracts for advertisement. So these things are all fixed in the short run. People can't change them, and the wages are locked in. So if revenue decreases to a firm, then the firm cannot change the wages. Marginal cost then becomes greater than marginal revenue and decrease. I use my own example from my own life, that in 2011, the town of Belmont, the revenue decreased, taxable revenue, because housing prices went down, and this was due to the 2008 housing crash. Town of Belmont, Belmont Public School, had less revenue in 2012 than they were going to have in 2011. All our salaries, I was a teacher of the school, I was salaried in, I had a contract, I was expecting a certain wage, and they couldn't renegotiate that. But the revenue was less than the cost, so Belmont Public, I, along with 13 other teachers, we were let go in April 2011, and the reason was they could not change my contract, sticky contract, but they could cut production. And if that held true, production output would have decreased, fewer teachers, students would have only been able to take 5 classes. Of course, there's a happy ending to that, and we'll talk about that in Macro Unit 4. The second theory, sticky price. We have wages. Here's a menu. I went to Spice Delight yesterday for lunch, a local Indian restaurant. They have printed menus. Now, they can change this quite easily. This is a piece of paper that they can reprint, and they can probably change their prices within a week. But right now, I know how much certain goods and services at Spice Delight are. Think about chains. Think about national products, national advertising campaigns. We use the Subway $5 football example class. I know it doesn't exist anymore, but for a time, you were expecting $5 at a Subway. So if price levels rise and $5 is seemingly cheap for a sub, output would increase. More people would go to Subway. If price levels fell, if demand decreased due to a recession, if $5 was a lot for a sandwich, or people didn't want to eat out, then output would decrease. The last example is misperceptions. I think this is a little weaker than the other two, the last theory that explains this. If a supplier believes the price level to drop, even though it doesn't, maybe it dips, they might cut production kind of prematurely. I think this is a little weaker than the other two, but it still helps to explain, and this might be true in one case. Now that's why the aggregate supply curve is upward sloping. These are things that would shift the short run aggregate supply. Here's a hint. We know that land, labor, capital changes to those three and technology shift the long run. In order to get to the long run, you have to go through the short run. So anything that shifts the long run aggregate supply will have to shift the short run aggregate supply. And I don't write super important a lot, but expectations about prices. So if people announce that the price level's dropping or increasing, or we're in a depression and a recession and price levels are falling and they expect that to fall, then aggregate supply would shift. We're going to see, this is really important because this explains how the economy fixes itself. And this will be our next lecture. And then the last thing, this is the economy in equilibrium. We have the long run, which indicates 5% unemployment. We have the upward sloping aggregate supply, the downward sloping aggregate demand. Wherever the short runs intersect, that's where we currently are. And right now this is equilibrium because they intersect at long run aggregate supply. So this is full employment, and this is the economy in equilibrium.